Hello, welcome. I have been far outside of the usual, just the chapter. This is April 11th. So we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And this is a lot to unpack. In fact, there's so much to unpack that I'm not going to do the last half of this chapter, verses 17 through 34. We just did communion at our church. I'm not going to get into that just because there's so much that we need to learn from at the first half of this chapter, verses 1 through 16. So, the first thing I want to address about this is something that is in this chapter, but is not in this chapter. The Bible is delicately resting on each verse is delicately resting on another. Line upon line, precept on precept, here a little, there a little, and you put it all together to get the broad picture. Here's an example. If you were to come and dog sit for me, I would tell you, put the collars on the dogs before you take them out. And I would explain the details of the collars that you put on the dogs. The collars keep them from going outside of our acreage. It keeps them within our acreage, okay? But if I were writing a note to Morgan about taking the dogs out, I wouldn't say anything about the collars because she already knows. She already knows to put the collars on the dogs. So the same thing happens in Scripture. When you are reading Scripture, you've got to put it all together. The Scripture does not contradict each other. It balances on each other. And you have to understand what is being written, why it is being written, to whom it is being written, what stage in development it was being written to them. I've already mentioned before, we're studying right now Corinthians. This is a letter written to people who lived in Corinth. Paul had only taught them for a year and a half. Jesus taught his disciples for 3.5 years before he left them. Paul only got a year and a half. Now, if you have ever discipled someone, let's not even say disciple. Let's talk about working in a public job. If you've got someone who's been on their job in a company for a year and a half versus someone who has been in that same company for 15 years, the person who has been there for 15 years is going to get a completely different letter than the person who has been there for a year and a half. So when Paul is writing to the Corinthians, he's writing people that he only was able to invest a year and a half's worth of teaching and instruction to them. Now, Apollos had come behind and had taught them some things, and there may have been other people who came along and taught them some things, but Paul is having to address some very basic issues without this huge umbrella of insight and understanding that somebody else would have. Okay? So one of the things that he is addressing in chapter 11 is submission and authority. Okay? And so I want to address that firstly. He says, I would have you know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. Now, first of all, we are not needing at all to address to the Corinthians the idea that God and Christ are two different persons. There are not three persons in the Godhead. God is a spirit. And therefore, in order for him to come among us and live among us as a man, he made a physical body, and that is Jesus Christ. And Christ took on the form of a servant and was subject to all passions like as we are, yet without sin. Christ came as a servant to man and a servant to the purpose of God. This is not two different persons. Christ was God manifest in the flesh. The Corinthians would not have even questioned this idea. They would not have even questioned it. The idea of the Trinity did not come around for another 300 years after this letter was written. This was not an issue to the Corinthian church. The Trinitarian doctrine, God in three persons, was not an option. So the fact that we are looking at headship, this is talking about authority, how the roles of authority are played out. God is a spirit, and he came in the form of Christ, and this physical body was subject to the purpose of God. Man is subject to Christ, and woman is subject to the man. Now, when man and woman were first created, of course, man was created first, and then woman was created. That the woman was subject to the man was not the case until after the curse. And part of the curse in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, part of that curse was that woman would be subject unto the man. That when woman was created, she was not created as being subject to the man. But because she went off doing her own imaginations and her own thinking in her own way, God said, you're going to need to be subject to the man. And quite frankly, I do not think it is a sane man that wants to be head of the woman. I think a man who walks around wanting and demanding that a woman be subject to him is a little off his rocker. Because Adam didn't want that job to begin with. And that's why God had to point it out. Look, this is your role. Your role is that you're supposed to be guiding this woman. I told you, Adam, you could eat of every tree in the garden, but not this one. And evidently he did tell the woman that. Woman did say, Eve did say to the serpent, we can eat of every tree, just not this tree. And, but God had to spell it out when it came to the curse. The woman has to be subject to the man. Look, dude, you're going to have to get on the ball here and help her not get herself in trouble. And 1 Timothy 2:12, let's see, I think I have that marked here. There's 1 Corinthians, I think it's my postcard. 1 Timothy 2:12, 13. It says, for Adam was first formed, then Eve. Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived was in transgression. So this is why the Lord set up this order of authority. It's not that the woman is the most demeaned. It's that the woman is the most protected. The woman is the most protected. Man is protected whenever he is surrendered to Christ. And of course, when a woman is not surrendered to Christ, then she's not going to even come near this line of authority or this line of protection, however you want to look at it. And so the understanding that by coming into proper order, you also operate in supreme authority. When a man is not surrendered to Christ, he is not operating in his proper protection or authority. And when a woman is not submitted to her husband, then she is not operating in proper authority or protection. And one of the reasons in looking at this, we have to also look at the understanding of operation within the church. Okay? We're going to get back to 1 Corinthians 11, but we're going to first look at authority within the church. So first of all, the reason we're going to look at it is because verse 4 says, every man praying or prophesying, having his head covered, dishonoreth his head. This head is not talking about his noggin, where his hair grows from. It's talking about this line of authority. He dishonors his head. The man's head is Christ. Okay? Every woman that prayeth or prophesieth with her head uncovered. Now this word head uncovered, that's talking about her head, her literal, what's on top of her shoulders, her noggin, dishonoreth her head. This head is not talking about this head. It's talking about this head, the man. She dishonors the person who is over her in both authority and protection. She dishonors the person protecting her. And if the man prays or prophesies with his head covered, he dishonors the head that is protecting him. He dishonors his protector. Now, here's the first thing I want to point out. The man is praying and prophesying. The woman is praying and prophesying. The woman is prophesying. Prophesying means to predict, to speak forth by divine inspiration, to utter forth, to declare, to break forth under sudden impulse in lofty discourse. The woman is prophesying. There is no problem in the church for a woman to prophesy. What else does prophesy mean? In the same way that a woman will prophesy by breaking forth under sudden impulse in lofty discourse, under like prompting, what prompting? What prompting? Divine inspirations. Under like prompting to teach, refute, reprove, admonish, comfort others, to act as a prophet. Paul is not contradicting himself when here he is pointing out that a woman prophesies he's not contradicting himself when in 1 Corinthians 14, he says that he wants a woman to keep silence. And in 1 Timothy 2, 11 and 12, he says that he wants a woman to keep silent in the church. He is not contradicting himself, and I'm going to explain why. But first of all, we have to acknowledge some things, and one of those things we have to acknowledge is that Paul says here that if a woman is going to pray or prophesy, she needs her head covered. We're going to talk about the covering and the uncovering here in just a moment, but I want to further make clear that it is appropriate for a woman to prophesy. What does prophesy mean? Predict, speak forth by divine inspiration, utter forth, break forth under sudden impulse. Okay, first of all, let's look at 1 Corinthians 14. So where it says, verse 34, it says, let your women keep silence in the churches. Okay, now, first of all, you need to know that this phrase, keep silence here, means hold their peace. It doesn't mean they are not allowed to speak, to utter words. It means they need to hold their peace. And the same word is used up here in verse 30, where in this section of scriptures, Paul is teaching about there not being confusion by over talking. And he says, let's look at verse 29. This is 1 Corinthians 14:29. Let the prophets speak 2 or 3, and let the other judge. If anything be revealed to another that sitteth by. So in other words, there are several prophets present, and one of them is sitting down while another has the floor. Has the floor, is in the pulpit, however you want to phrase it. But the one sitting by needs to first hold his peace because someone else is speaking. Let the person that is in the pulpit or that has the floor, let them speak, and let the person who is sitting by hold their peace. That's the same. You could have, the translator could have used the exact same wording here. Let your women hold their peace. Now, here's an addendum. Addendum. I'm not saying the word right. Addendum. There we go. Addendum. Here's the addendum to it. For it is not permitted unto them to speak, but they are commanded to be under obedience, as also saith the law. The Torah does not say that a woman cannot speak. The Torah usually and often when we are talking about the law, it's talking about the Old Testament, the Torah, Moses' law. But this is not talking about Moses' law. Moses' law does not talk about a woman not speaking. This is talking about the Roman law. And so because this whole section is talking about guests, when guests come in and look at what's happening, they're going to be confused if you're over talking each other, if it looks like a big argument is going on. Also be aware that you are under Roman law. And in Roman law, a woman cannot speak publicly. And so be aware that you've got the Roman law that you've got to work around. If they will learn anything, let them ask their husbands at home. In other words, we don't want this arguing back and forth in this public setting. Go home and talk to your husbands about it. For it is a shame for women to speak in the church. We know that it is not a shame for a woman to emit a sound or to talk within the church. And we know that for several reasons. One, I'm either going to take the time to list, I've got somebody who wrote an essay, a website of somebody who wrote an essay that lists all of the roles in the New Testament that women played. I'm either going to take the time and write out all those verses or I'm just going to put the link. Just depends on what kind of time I get today. But we know that women were not utterly silent. We know they played roles of leadership within the church throughout all of the New Testament. They did. From Mary, the mother of Jesus, to Lydia, to Phoebe, and on and on and on. There are so many women that we know had a voice, that we know taught. And so we've got to put it all in context. And we know that women are prophesying because Paul says if a woman is going to pray or prophesy, all she needs to do is make sure her head is covered. And we're going to talk more about this covering again. But I just wanted to take this time to talk about these verses that talk about women keeping silent. It's not talking about not having a voice, that a woman is not allowed to do what I'm doing right this minute, which is teach. That is not what Paul is saying. Paul was all about those women teaching. Let's see. Did I mark? I thought I did. Here it is. So one other thing I wanted to point out to in reference to women having a voice within the church is when Paul was writing to Timothy in 1 Timothy 2, these guidelines for women, he's not opposed to women praying, lifting up holy hands without wrath or doubting, because he says, in like manner also that women. In like manner also that women. That means these two descriptions and verses link together. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. The fact that men do these things, women also, if they're going to be lifting up holy hands without wrath or doubting, there's these other things that women need to do. But in this like manner also, that women need to dress this way in modest apparel, shamefacedness, sobriety, braided hair, gold, pearls, cos, all of these things, not with braided hair. Sorry that I left out those words. I did not mean to. I just meant to be fast. And no, I'm not being fast because I'm explaining myself. All of these things go hand in hand. If this is what he's asking of women, this is also what he's asking of men. And if this is what he's asking of men, this is also what he's asking of women. Okay? So he says, let the women learn in silence with all subjection. The same way that, that we're talking about order of authority, that's what's happening here. And this word nor could, I have it written down, the original Greek word. The original Greek word is oude, and it means no, not. And so it can be, the translator could have easily written this phrase, I suffer not a woman to teach, no, not usurp authority over the man. The point here is not teach. The point is that we are not usurping authority over the man. Okay? And you've got to put it all in context. Like I was talking earlier about Marco and Stars Colors. Some people I'm going to write details. If it's Morgan, I'm not going to write as many details. You've got to put everything, the whole puzzle has got to come together to understand it all. And again, there are so many scriptures that are listing women and their roles of leadership within the church. We know that it was not, these two verses cannot be pulled out and say, see, women can't teach. They can't even speak. They've got to be absolutely silent. By the way, I've not done heavy research into this, so I'm not going to make a big point out of it, but I am going to tell you that I have done light research and have recently discovered that this thing that we see now in synagogues where men are sitting in one section with a curtain between them and women are sitting in another, that I have recently discovered, I'm not done deep research, but that didn't even start happening until the medieval ages, into the Middle Ages. So one of the things that I've heard is that this idea of women keeping silent in the church and ask their husbands at home had to do with the fact that women were sitting far away from their husbands. That may or may not have been the case, but for sure, women had so much liberty, felt so much liberty in the church that the same way men were, where was that other, 1 Corinthians 14, in the same way that men were needing to hold their peace, like we see in 1 Corinthians 14:30, men were needing to first hold their peace. Women felt such liberty that they also had to be told, hold your peace. Just because you got something to say and the spirit of prophecy is all over you doesn't mean you can just get up and say it. No. Everybody needs to hold their peace. And also don't forget that Roman law says you're not even supposed to be speaking in public. So be happy that you even got the freedom of the Holy Ghost that lets you have a voice. Okay, let's get back to today's reading. And let's talk about this covered and uncovered. Okay, so first of all, we are talking about falling under our levels of not only who has authority over who, but who is protecting who. And we live in an age that likes to emphasize the authority aspects. When I am properly in my operating in my role under authority, then I also have authority. And I love that is true. Proverbs 12:4 says that the wife is the crown of her husband. An excellent wife is the crown of her husband. Proverbs 12:4. An excellent wife is the crown of her husband. Well, guess where a crown goes? A crown goes on top of the man's head. The only time a wife can be seen as being, I hate to even use the phrase over her husband because I hate to say that. I'm not trying to insinuate that she's got authority over her husband, but if she's an excellent wife, that is literally the only time the crown of her goes on the man's head. I'm not in any way insinuating that's when she has authority over the men. I'm not insinuating that. I'm just saying that's interesting. When she properly fulfills this role as a woman that we see in Proverbs chapter 31, the word virtuous there and virtuous woman means like an army. That is a powerful woman. When a woman operates as a Proverbs 31 woman, she is a crown to her husband. She is a crown to her husband. Her husband safely trusts in her. She makes decisions for the family because she's not out spending all the money and she's not out making things fearful for her husband. Anyway, that's just an interesting understanding there that she can be a crown to her husband. But so we're talking about falling in roles of authority as well as roles of protection. And we're also talking about dishonoring. A man can dishonor Christ if he prays or prophesies with his head covered. And a woman dishonors all this that is above her, not just her husband or the man. A woman is dishonoring the man and dishonoring Christ's purpose as he was surrendered to the plan of God. She dishonors all of this if she prays or prophesies with her head uncovered, having her head uncovered. So we've got covered and uncovered going on. And one of the things that we find in the modern church is confusion over whether this is talking about a piece of cloth or a hat. The tradition of men taking off their hats when they go into a church comes from this right here, from 1 Corinthians 11, verses 4 through 7 and 13 through 15. that's where the tradition of a man taking off his hat when people are going to pray. Unfortunately, we are living in a society that is losing the knowledge of that, and that's very sad. Refer back to my last live stream that I did right before this. I believe that was 1 Corinthians 6. And I don't remember which chapter it was, but refer back to that because I talk about American culture and where it stems from. But we're losing that because so many people don't know that it's a sign of respect. Our men aren't being taught that. But in fact, this verse is not talking about a hat. And we know that because after verses 8 through 12, which is talking about the power and authority, that's a really cool thing that I'm not going to dwell on right now, but we start talking about covered and uncovered again. And we know that it's talking about hair because verse 15 says, her hair is given her for a covering. Her hair is given her for a covering. The covering is her hair. If a woman prays or prophesies with her head uncovered, her hair is given her for a covering. With her head uncovered, she dishonors her head. Doth not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame? When we're talking about a covering, praying or prophesying with your head covered or uncovered, we're talking about hair, long hair and short hair. So the word covered is kata, or K-A-T-A-H. I don't know if I'm saying that right. And it means down from. Uncovered means not covered, and it means unveiled. Now, because it also means unveiled, that's where people get the idea that we need to wear a veil. But we know that it's not talking about a piece of material because it says her hair is given her for a covering or for a veil. Her hair is given her for a covering. Now, we also know that we're not necessarily talking about length of hair. Every man that prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonoreth his head. Every woman that prayeth or prophesieth with her head uncovered dishonors her head. Verse 15, if a woman have long hair, it is a glory for her. Her hair is given her for a covering. Now, long hair does not necessarily have to do with how many inches your hair is or is not. And that's very important to understand. The number of inches of your hair is not what is important. The reason that's important is because when God gave this word, he gave it to all of humanity. And that includes the humanity that by nature of the texture the hair is, which varies by ethnicity, it will differ as to how many inches those people can grow their hair. Also, this will vary by the various hormonal changes that a person will go through as to how long their hair is. This will also vary by a person's sickness as to how long their hair is. So if a woman have long hair, does not have to do with how many inches. So then what does it have to do with? Now, I'm going to go back and remind us that we're talking about Corinth, which is a Roman-ruled Greek city. So Rome was the empire, the government of the day, and the city was a Greek city. I've got a map I'm not going to show you right now. And we talked about in our last live stream how Corinth had at one point 1,000 temple prostitutes. And the temple prostitutes would shave their head. You knew they were a temple prostitute when they walked around the city because they were the only ones with a shaved head. And because it was a Greek, because Aphrodite was a Greek goddess that was, the religion of the land, if a woman walked around with a shaved head, she would be respected in the city because she was a temple prostitute. Much like when I'm in Thailand and a Buddhist monk comes walking around. Buddhist monks wear a specific color, a specific type of clothes, and they have their head shaved. And so when they walk around, they are automatically respected around the village. Their food is whatever people in the village give them. They walk around in the morning with a bowl, and people put food in their bowl. That's their food for the day. In that same way, temple prostitutes would shave their heads and walk around the town, and they would get certain favors based on the fact that their head was shaved. So Paul is having to address hair. And so he's saying, if a woman is not covered, she might as well be shorn. If it's a shame for a woman to be shorn or shaven, let her be covered. Shorn or shaven. Shorn, this Greek word is kiro, and it means shear, which means to cut, clip with sharp instrument. Sounds like scissors to me. Shear means to remove by or is as if by cutting. So, it's a shame for a woman to cut, clip, remove as if by cutting. Whether that's a centimeter, an inch, 5 inches. It's a shame for a woman to cut, clip, remove by, or as if by cutting. It's also for a shame for a woman to be shaven. That means shear with a razor to the skin. Since it's a shame to cut your hair in any measure and to shave your head, let her be covered. Her hair is given her for a covering. And we're going to wrap up. Well, let's look at the word shame. The word shame means dishonor. Oh man, I learned how to say this word earlier. It's not my regular vocabulary, so I had to learn how to say it. Ignominy. There we go. Ignominy. Dishonor, ignominy, which means disgrace, and shame also means disgrace. It means vile and reproach. It is a shame for a woman to cut, clip, remove by or as if by cutting. And it's a shame to shear with a razor to the skin. And since it's a shame to do that, then let her grow out her hair because her hair is given her for a covering. If any man seem to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither the churches of God. This is saying, if you've got a problem with this, this is just how it is. This is our custom. And it is not our custom to be contentious. This is what we are living by. So there you go. And that is why, ladies, maybe possible gentlemen, if this ever goes to a podcast, though I don't imagine it will be, but this is why I do not cut my hair. I do not bother the dead ends. I do not even consider split ends on the end of my hair as being unhealthy, because it's a shame for me to cut, clip with sharp instrument, to remove by or as if by cutting. It is a shame for me to do that to my hair. I leave those split ends alone. I ignore them. Your hair does not grow from the end. It grows from the scalp. Your split ends do not make your hair grow or not grow. So ignore them. Leave them alone. Ignore your split ends. Leave your split ends alone. They mean nothing but vanity. Your split ends and your being bothered by them is nothing but vanity. I said it, and I ain't ashamed that I said it. It is a shame to cut, clip with sharp instrument, to remove by or as if by cutting. It is a shame. Your hair is given for a covering. And Brother Stone King has an amazing message about the authority of uncut hair, as does Joey Campatella. I think I can more easily find Brother Joey Campatella's sermon about the authority of uncut hair, and I'm going to include that in this post. Thank you for joining me today. I love you. God bless you. Bye-bye.